Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to a special programme on someone who shot to international fame some 20 years ago, Yvonne Ridley. In 2001, this investigative journalist was captured by the Taliban in Afghanistan, just as the American-led bombing campaign started, and her life hung in the balance. However, once released, her life journey took a surprising direction. She converted to Islam and became an avid critic of Western foreign policy in the war on terror, and has undertaken speaking tours throughout the world. She has been called something close to a celebrity in the Islamic world, and in 2008 was voted the most recognisable woman in the Islamic world by Islam Online. After entering domestic UK politics as chair of the briefly successful Solidarity Party, she moved to Scotland in 2014 to support the cause of Scottish independence. Now she's back in the public eye with the launch of a new book, The Caledonians. However, once again, the topic represents something of a surprise. Alex caught up with Yvonne in the studio.
Well, few people in the last generation have had as fascinating a life in journalism and political activism than Yvonne Ridley. My guest for today. Yvonne, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much, Alex.
So we're going to get on to this new book that you've launched, which I find fascinating. But let's start at the beginning. You're a County Durham lass, an area of steel mining and heavy industry, and that's where you were brought up in the 1960s. How did that shape your political attitude?
Well, you know, I've got working class DNA coursing through me, and the solidarity and unity in hardship was the trademark of the working classes. And so it really did shape my life.
So you went into a pretty early age into journalism as a female journalist, not the easiest profession to break into in the 1980s, but you became an editor, one of the first female editors of Thomson Regional newspapers. I mean, how did that work out?
I'd been working as a journalist for quite a few years, and then I progressed up the career ladder, and this opportunity came to edit Wales on Sunday, and I absolutely enjoyed it. You know, it was a great opportunity. We put on circulation and won awards, and we did incredibly well. But at that time, the signs of the decline in the print industry were on the horizon. The accountants were taking over the newspapers. And from there, I moved on to Fleet Street. And
that was a pretty hard-drinking, masculine, male-dominated culture, but you more than held your own. You went through a range of newspapers working for the Express Group, and that's what took you faithfully to Afghanistan after 9/11, at the invasion and the airstrikes were about to be launched. There you were as an investigative journalist in Afghanistan, finding out what the Taliban was all about, and then kind of disaster happened, virtue of a donkey.
Yes, that's right. Well, there were 3,000 journalists from around the world waiting for the war to start, and we were all in Pakistan. And I decided that I would try and sneak into Afghanistan. It worked very well for 2 days, but coming back, I was done for by a rogue donkey. I was wearing the all-enveloping blue burqa, and the only piece of equipment that I had taken in to Afghanistan was a camera. And when this donkey bolted, the camera fell out of the folds of my burqa right in front of a Taliban soldier. I just remember going up in the air and crashing to the ground and having this very angry Taliban soldier screaming and shouting at me. I took the camera off my neck and handed it to this young soldier who continued screaming and shouting, and then I stood back and closed my eyes waiting to be shot. And about 10 seconds later, I opened my eyes again, and he'd gone. He didn't realise I was a Westerner. He wanted to find out who was in charge of this woman and then we'll get to the bottom of this crime, because cameras were forbidden under the Taliban.
But then what followed was the most extraordinary 11 days, which basically shaped your life, you know, defining 11 days in your life. But what happened to you after they started to interrogate you, try and find out who you were? What were they trying to do, and what did they do with you?
Well, they thought I was an American spy. They thought I was some sort of G.I. Jane character. And I kept telling them that I was British, and they said, well, you've got this accent that we don't understand. And that's when I said I'm a Geordie. I'm from the tribal areas, and they quite like that idea.
And were you speaking to them in English, or had you picked up some Pashtun, or
no.
what?
I spoke to them in English, and this young man who spoke Pashtun and English and Urdu, he acted as the translator.
So then you were taken to what, a prison or an encampment, or what happened to you?
I was taken to the intelligence headquarters, and in truth I just thought, this is the end. They will kill me. I believed all of the propaganda attached to them, and so I just thought, pointless kissing the hand that slaps you. Let's just accelerate it and be the prisoner from hell. And I was hoping that they would just take me out and shoot me, and that would be the end of it. And so I was the prisoner from hell.
So were you being interrogated? Were they trying to find out who you were? Were you subjected to torture? I mean, what was happening to you?
Yes, I mean, every day, half a dozen of the scariest looking men had been brought down from Kabul to interview me, and they all had these massive big black beards and these huge black turbans. The more pious the person, the larger their turban. And they were very scary to look at, but it turned out that we had a real clash of culture. I was ignorant of their culture, they were ignorant of mine, and in the end there was one incident where they just got up and walked out. They couldn't deal with me. They said to me through the translator, you have lied to us. And I said, everything I've told you is the truth. And one of them said, but you have a daughter. And I said, well, you didn't ask me if I had a daughter. And he said, but you said you're not married. I said, I'm not married. And he threw his arms in the air and screamed at me, how can you have a daughter if you're not married?
And you said, because I'm from Concert.
And and I said, have you got the concept of divorce in this crazy world you're living in? And so I explained, you know, about the father, and that we were still in touch, but we were divorced. And then he said, why haven't you got another husband? And I looked and said, I have my own job, I have my own car, I have my own home, I have my own salary. Why would I need a man? And the translators stuttered this out to the rest, and they just got up and had to go. And they looked at me as though they'd found something bad on the bottom of their shoe. They just couldn't deal with it.
Now, at this point, your employers, Express newspapers, were sort of rounding up I don't know, you call it a rescue mission, or at least a diplomatic mission, and I think it was widely assumed you'd either be tortured or killed or ransomed as a hostage, be a human shield or something like that. And about this time, the bombing was about to start, so you were right in the middle of the onset of a huge bombardment. But in reality, it seemed that what the Taliban were trying to do was establish that you were indeed a bona fide journalist.
In the end, against all the odds, they did let me go. My newspaper, I know Richard Desmond, he was the publisher, and people are, you know, he's a very Marmite character. But as soon as I was arrested, he sent out a team to sit down and negotiate with the Taliban, and friends who were involved in PR, cranked up my mother to give press conferences. They went right against all government advice to say nothing, keep quiet, keep your head down. And in the end, the Taliban said, we are releasing the English woman on humanitarian grounds. She's a very bad woman with a very bad mouth. and so I was released. And while I wouldn't be critical of the Foreign Office, what I would say is to anybody who finds themselves or a family member in my situation is don't listen to the government. Don't think that they're doing anything when they say we're working behind the scenes. Just go out there and do it for, you know, for yourself. I mean, there are times where governments cannot be seen to be sitting down with the enemy or with terrorists and negotiating. But there's nothing to stop families. There's nothing to stop companies of employees doing this and keeping it in the public eye, because I think that publicity is all important.
And because of the activities of your family and your company, you shot to international stardom. I mean, had you any concept whatsoever, as you were still being held in Kabul, that your name was now a household name around the world? Did you have any concept at all that you were an international celebrity because of your confinement?
No idea at all. No idea. I was horrified actually, because my job in London was, as you said, as an investigative journalist and involving a lot of undercover work, and to be suddenly find that my photograph was in every single newspaper around the world was not what I wanted. You know, no journalist wants to become the story.
Let's get to the process. How did they release you? I mean, they were releasing this English woman with the bad mouth. So how did they go about? Did they take to Checkpoint Charlie, or I mean, what happened?
In the end, the diplomat who was in charge of me just decided that it was safer for my security just to hand me over. And so I was handed over to the Pakistan authorities, questioned by them because they wanted to know the identity of the two guides who'd taken me in, which, you know, again, I didn't say. And my guides did eventually get released as well, and we've been in touch. So eventually, by the time I was handed over to the British authorities in Peshawar, I was given a lecture by a man from the Foreign Office saying, you know, you were so badly behaved in prison. He said, we were hearing these tales about you throwing things at the Taliban and shouting and spitting at them. And he said, don't you know how to behave in prison? And I said, I can't believe this. And I said, I'm out. There are 8 other Westerners in there, and I'm out.
You didn't say better plates than bombs.
Absolutely.
So Yvonne Ridley, released from the hands of the Taliban after the most extraordinary 11 days in captivity, but it turned into an experience which took her life in a totally different direction. Join us after the break to find out what that was.
Welcome back. Yvonne Ridley was captured in 2001 by the Taliban, and her story caught the public imagination. Since her release, her life has taken some surprising turns, with her dedicated campaigning against Western policy towards the Muslim world. Now she's back with a new book, The Caledonians, and once again, its subject matter proves something of a surprise.
Yvonne, released from the hands of the Taliban, but this took your life, this 11 days, in a totally different direction.
Well, the day before I was released, the war started. And I've covered wars before, but I've never been bombed by Britain and America, and it's a truly terrifying experience. And I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before. I just realised bombs don't discriminate. These bombs that are coming down don't know I'm British, they don't know I'm a civilian, and you can hear a cruise missile from 20 miles away. These were coming within half a mile of the prison. And I just thought, I am going to be killed, but not by the Taliban, but by my own country. And I sort of made a pact with the big fella upstairs and said, if I get out of here, I'm going to commit myself to the anti-war movement, which I did. And in the November of 2001, I was speaking to 60,000 people in Trafalgar Square, talking to them about the futility of war and how bombs and missiles don't serve any real purpose for peace at all.
Now, the anti-war movement against the action in Afghanistan was strong, but nothing like the anti-war protest that was to arise 2 years later about the invasion of Iraq. So your involvement in the anti-war movement, your conversion to Islam, came just about the time that the war in Iraq, the war against terror, was being enlarged by George Bush and Tony Blair to invade Iraq. So what was your activities in the protests around that?
I went right across Germany, talking about my experiences, other European countries, and I was in Scotland when the war began. And I remember the students and school children in Scotland were absolutely magnificent. They just left their classrooms and held protests, and they stopped the traffic on the Forth Bridge. It was...
And then there was a vast march in Glasgow. Of course, at the time, as I remember, the Labour Party conference was being held, and there was this huge march which convened at the point of the Labour Party conference, where the Prime Minister was virtually encamped in his own prison in the conference hall, with those hundreds of thousands of people outside demanding that it shouldn't be in our name that Iraq be invaded. So you were part of that protest arising in Scotland.
Yes, I'd also been to Iraq a few months earlier, and which was obviously under the control of the Saddam regime. But it was quite clear then that there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was quite clear, speaking to ordinary Iraqis, that this was not going to play well. There was a lot of hostility towards the West because of the sanctions which had destroyed the entire middle class of Iraq at the time. And it was clear that the last thing that the Iraqis wanted was to go to war with Britain and America.
So from your own personal perspective at this time, in 2003, 2004, had you completed your journey from being an investigative journalist, a professional journalist, one of the leading female journalists in the country, into being an anti-war activist? And that is a journey that you had taken and carried forward after your experience in captivity?
Yeah, I was still working as a journalist. I was the first journalist into Jenin in Palestine in 2002 after the massacre there. And that's when I began to realise, again, probably naive, this sounds naive, but that's when I began to realise that powerful people in powerful places will lie. And I listened to Colin Powell standing at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem saying, I saw no evidence of a massacre in Jenin. And that was because he never left the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. I went and I could smell the rotting corpses under the rubble before I even saw the
You're saying that even
bodies.
Colin Powell, who most people would regard as an honourable man, was pressurised by the position of office to mislead and give a false impression?
Well, I don't know what sort of pressure would make you tell such a blatant lie.
Well,
but
perhaps being American Secretary of State and the exigencies of American statecraft and foreign policy.
Well, he has previous for it. I mean, this is the man who was in Vietnam when he said, "I saw no evidence of a massacre over my lie. I was only obeying my orders." Now, where did we hear that one?
But your own position, I mean, you were engaged in writing and contributing. Your position, ironically, as a captive of the Taliban, had given you an international profile, and you had decided, even in your journalism, to translate that into political activism. And that led you directly into party politics, because you became not just a member and not just a candidate, but I think the convener of the Respect Party, which was arising as an anti-war party at that time.
Yes, well, I had been in the Labour Party as a teenager, and in 2003 I tore up my Labour Party membership card and said, I can't remain in this party. I spoke to the wonderful Tony Benn. He said at the time, "Don't leave. There are far too many good socialists out there with no home to go to." And he was right, but then the Respect Party was created after the war. People often get confused over that. And so all of those homeless socialists gravitated around the Respect Party.
So you saw the Respect Party as a home for the lost souls of the left.
Yes, yes.
And became a leading figure in it, and of course a candidate, because you've actually fought not just European elections, but you fought a parliamentary by-election in Rotherham, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that experience.
Well, that was quite a tough gig. The Labour MP Dennis McShane had been charged with expense fiddling or something like that, and he had to stand down. The climate felt right. George Galloway had just been elected in Bradford West, so we would try and emulate that in Rotherham.
So this was about 2009, 2010?
2010, and it was a very tough campaign. You could see the rise of the far right in politics, which has been normalised today.
But so it was a tough campaign, but I mean, you performed honourably. You saved your deposit, which is always, a great test for minority parties in such contests. Did that satiate your desire for parliamentary contest? Would you say, right, OK, I've tried that, done it? And by that time, the Respect Party was finding its own difficulties internally.
Yes. I was becoming quite disillusioned, and then I heard whispers of the Scots are going for independence, and this really excited me because, I lived in Westminster. I used to have a lobby pass. I could see up close and personal the corruption and the shenanigans that were going on in Westminster, which made it was difficult to separate the Tories from the Labour Party. So the thought of independence really excited me.
So this was the SNP on the rise into government, led by somebody whose name escapes me at the present moment. So you as a North East lass, as a Respect Party leading member, you moved to the borders of Scotland, the Scottish borders, the debatable lands.
Yes, I moved there in 2011. I voted with my feet. I resigned from the Respect Party, which at that point I think was going nowhere, and I was reinvigorated by this desire for independence.
So you've been active in the SNP and the borders, but your activities haven't been just confined to political activism. You've been taking up your pen again. You've contributed to a number of books, and obviously books on journalism, but books about your time with the Taliban. But your latest book is quite different. It's entitled The Caledonians. I think we can have a look at the front piece now. But this is I was expecting a political novel, and what it is a time-travelling adventure story. Would that be a reasonable description?
It is, but there are politics in there. In fact, there's an incident recounting Margaret Thatcher's last day as Prime Minister, in which the main character sneaks into Downing Street and gets the keys into her private office on the day that she leaves to remove a document which is to secure the Galloway Hills, because she'd identified them at one point as a great place to store nuclear waste.
I remember being on the demonstrations, but it did occur to me as I was reading the description of the book with this, which is laced with Scottish history and, as you say, a bit of politics, a bit of the landscape of Scotland and time travel, that, you know, if it becomes a film or a television series, it's that guy called David Tennant who might be tempted into such a role. Had that ever crossed your mind? I
think the book would make a great TV or film using the amazing backdrop of Scotland.
It is an amazing backdrop indeed, Yvonne. Yvonne Ridley, editor, campaigning journalist, captive of the Taliban, political activist, and now science fiction author with a lacing of politics and history. Many success indeed, and thank you so much for being in the Alex Salmond Show. And to send you on your way, you're entitled to the Quaich, as you well know, the drill Gaelic for a loving cup.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I'll certainly treasure this, and thank you.
Great pleasure, Yvonne. Thank you.
What a remarkable interview. The near-death experience of being captured by the Taliban could have impacted on hard-bitten journalist Yvonne Ridley in a variety of ways. Few would have expected her life journey, a convert to Islam and an entrant into the radical side of UK politics. Now a campaigner for Scottish independence and a science fiction writer. Yvonne Ridley looks set to surprise us for some time to come. Next week, we focus on Northern Ireland. The Stormont Assembly has now been reconvened and has united to condemn Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. After Sinn Féin's stunning victories in the elections in the Republic, is Irish unity now closer than at any time since partition? But for now, from Alex, myself and all of the team, we hope to see you next week.